to consider what a vocation is, or basically to consider what is the meaning of life, how should we live during our years here on earth? Very basic question. We kind of come to that question from different angles. But vocation is one kind of lens through which to consider the meaning of our human life, right? For some of us, that life might be many years. Might be, there's some people living today who were alive when the Cubs last won the World Series. There are some people who are more than 108 years old. And for others, very tragically, it's a few years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But what are we trying to do while we're here? We might say that one basic way of saying it is live for a cause, right? Don't just exist. Don't just try to survive, to stay alive, but rather live for a cause. Now, that begs the question, what is the cause, right? When we're born, we don't have any cause in mind other than to survive, to eat and sleep and digest. But as we grow older and start to learn, think, to talk, to read, we realize there are ideas out there about what a human being is, who God is, life after death. We're in the month of November. We're thinking about life after death. We're thinking about what comes next because we're near the end of the church year. We have 2 more weeks. So the readings in these weeks of November are thinking about death and the last things. So how do you prepare for that? And if you prepare for that, if you know how to prepare for that, then your life now is satisfying. It has a meaning and a purpose. So that's in a sense the question. In the first reading of Maccabees, it's a pretty brutal story. They're trying to get these young men to violate their Jewish faith. Now, in one sense, it's kind of comical from our perspective. They're trying to get the young men to eat pork. Just eat a hot dog, will you? Come on, just eat a hot dog. But for the Jewish people, it was a very clear command from God, you don't eat pork. There were reasons for that. So really what their captors were saying, do what we want, not what God wants. Come on, just do what we want. Not a big deal. Eat a hot dog. But it was a big deal. They knew clearly what God wanted, and here these human beings were trying to pressure them to violate what God wanted, to do what they want. So what cause were they going to live for? Were they just going to try to survive, stay alive? Or did their life have a purpose? Were they trying to know and serve and please God in this life, in the faith that they would be with Him in the next? It says they put out their tongue, and they took their tongue off. They put out their hands, they took their hands off. It's pretty brutal. But they stay faithful. They're saints. We read about them today, over 2,000 years later. They had a cause that they were living for. They may not have understood completely why they weren't supposed to eat that hot dog, pork. But they knew it was pretty clear guidance from God. In the gospel today, we hear about marriage. It's kind of a comical setup here, right? In the Jewish tradition, if you were married, if a man was married to a woman and he died, she was supposed to marry his brother. Now, again, in the Catholic tradition, you're not allowed to do that. In the Catholic tradition, you're allowed to eat hot dogs, and you're not allowed to marry someone's brother. So you see how it shifts. But again, we're just seeking understanding from God, right? And so we're the Jewish people. That's the best we can do. Now, there's a logic. In a sense, the logic of Christianity is easier to understand than the logic of Judaism, but it was a different time and place. But so this one man had 6 brothers, and so this poor woman had to marry all 7, and through none of them could she have a child. So whose wife is she now? Now this question was being proposed by the Sadducees, who didn't even believe there was a heaven. This is just a setup. They're mocking Jesus. So the question of what is marriage? Does marriage continue beyond death? And if so, it's pretty complicated. You need Judge Judy up there to sort this out, right? So Jesus says you don't get it. Once you die, if you're in heaven, there is no marriage as you understand it here. In this life on earth, you marry one person at a time. In heaven, it's not like that. Marriage is a vocation, right? You're living for a purpose. You're promising to try to love this one person fully. As human beings, we can't love more than one person at a time fully, right? We just don't have the energy and the time and the generosity. So the person crosses our paths, we fall in love, and we say, I'm going to make a promise to try to serve this person until I die, till death do us part. And if we're blessed with children, to serve them too. When we die, we're not limited by time and space. You don't get tired in heaven. We can love many people fully. In a sense, we can love everyone fully. Not necessarily equally, because we're going to have special affection for those we knew in this life. At least that's what theologians propose. But fully. Right? You can see everyone in a sense in a moment, we believe. You can know them in a moment, we believe. Right? I mean, we say pray to the saints, pray to Mary. What if we were all praying to Mary at the same time? Could Mary see us all at the same time and hear us all at the same time? We believe she can, right? So that must mean when we die too, that's going to be our situation. Right? We can only handle so many requests at a time down here, but up there, there's no limit. I mean, that's how Santa Claus does it, right? So St. Nicholas can take all those requests all around the world in the same moment. But marriage, in a sense, you're living for God, but you're doing it through marriage. You're trying to serve that person, and we know it's difficult and challenging, especially in today's era, when we're not encouraged by society to persevere. And society even questions the very nature of marriage today. But marriage is a vocation, a promise to serve the person in front of you, to do the best you can. And when you mess up, to say you're sorry and keep trying until you die. That's the general understanding of a vocation. Last week we had the Little Sisters of the Poor. A vocation to the religious life is similar but different, where a woman says, I'm promised to serve the people put under my care until I die. So for the Little Sisters of the Poor, who is it? It's older people who aren't always the most patient, are they? Right? We have aches and pains when we're older, and we just don't feel good some days, and it's hard to be pleasant and patient with the people around us. We're all going to be there someday. It's a different stage of life. But the sisters promise, day in and day out, to love those put under their care. In a sense, they're married to the people under them. Some sisters teach. They try to love their students. It's not always easy to love teenagers, is it? And I can ask the teenagers that, right? We're not always that lovable. Some days we're very lovable, other days we're not. Some serve the sick. That's very difficult work. It's often very unpleasant. You're around death. You love them, but it's hard emotionally because you love them and they die. The patient, it breaks your heart. But they promise to love the people put under their care till death do them part. Also, of course, the vocation of priesthood. In the parish priesthood, the priest promises to try to love the people within his parish. This is his spiritual family, right? It's a family relationship. We call the priest Father. Father, your last name is difficult to say. Well, you don't need my last name. You can just say Father. I don't have that benefit with you, but promise till we die to keep trying. This is the sense of vocation, but it makes life, then you have a challenge in front of you. Can I do it? You know what you're trying to accomplish. You're not living randomly. You're not just trying to survive. You're trying to thrive. You're trying to expand your capacity to be generous, to serve, to be wise, to know how to interact well with other people, to be an excellent human being in this life which continues into the next. In the next life, there's no effort involved. We love well easily. We can love more than 7 people in the next life. So that challenge to serve the people under our care to whom we have committed. We have the men's ministry has been going on the last few weeks, and we talked about 7 deadly sins, and this morning we were talking about anger. How do you overcome anger? If you're going to live marriage well, religious life, priesthood, if you're a single person in the world trying to serve those who cross your path at work or in your family, your neighborhood, sometimes we get angry, and how do we overcome that anger? And we try to forgive. You can't succeed in marriage, you can't succeed in any vocation without forgiveness. But the way it was presented was, but forgiveness is in a sense an offensive weapon. When there's anger, when someone insults you or hurts you, a division starts to be created. Maybe your spouse hurts you, and now there's a division that's starting to be created. Your vocation, in a sense, is starting to be jeopardized a little bit here. Or your brother sins against you. There's a breach within your family. There's a division that's starting to be created. And forgiveness is us taking the offensive and saying, no, I'm going to preserve this vocation. You hurt me, but I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to hold the grudge. I'm going to push back to reunite. I'm going to push back to reconcile. This marriage, this family, this parish is too valuable in God's eyes to be divided. So in a sense, forgiveness is an active effort to breach the gap, to close the gap. I think that's a great way of thinking about it. It's not the passive, meek, necessarily just acceptance, but it's rather actively, and it takes effort, doesn't it, to overcome ourselves, to do that, to live the vocation well. In this Vocation Awareness Week, have some good news to report, some exciting news. Now, the Archdiocese has asked St. Philip Neri Parish to sponsor 2 new seminarians. So we already have seminarian Tyler Klein, who grew up here. We have seminarian David Ray, who asked our parish to sponsor him. He's from Northern Virginia. And the diocese has asked us to sponsor 2 new seminarians who are coming from a place very far away, from Africa, from Cameroon. But their bishop has asked them if they would be willing to serve the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and they said yes. So in a sense, they're coming as missionaries, but they're going to be seminarians for our diocese and then ordained to serve in our diocese. And then after 5 years as a priest, they get to decide if they will stay in our diocese or go back home to Cameroon. So we have to be really nice to them, okay? We got to really overwhelm them with generosity so they will spend the rest of their lives serving our diocese. Seminarian Kenneth and Maurice, there's an article in the bulletin today describing a little bit about their story, but extremely generous on their part to leave their home and their families to come and serve us here in the diocese. So we hope sometime in the near future they'll be able to come and introduce themselves to our parish. So, all of a sudden, St. Philip Neri has the most seminarians in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Well done! Now, we can't rest. We have to foster vocations from within our families here, too. But maybe this will make it easier. We'll have more seminarians around. But finally, again, the vocation of priesthood, we know that we're in the midst of realigning parishes partly because we need more priests, also because of demographic shifts, but we need more men in the field. And someone had a good image of priesthood. They said there's a need out there, and so God puts on the heart of some men a desire to go confront the need. There are people who need to be helped and served, and so you go and there's a need and you go to respond to it. There is a passage in Hebrews, and it says, we will run to the fight. Right? There's a struggle. There's always a struggle between good and evil in the world. Right? And the priest is called to run to that struggle, to recognize it and run and confront it. To help serve the needs of human beings who are struggling, who are seeking understanding. What is the purpose of life? Who are struggling with their own temptations. Our families who have our own struggles, right? We have a parish to draw families together to help each other in our struggles. And so God needs men who are willing to run to the fight, to go to serve the needs of others, to go help engage that struggle between good and evil, to bring Christ into the midst of our situations. So we do need to continue to pray that from within our own families, perhaps God will call some young men. It's a sacrifice for the family, it's a sacrifice for the man, but it's a great adventure. It's a great cause for which to live. So we thank God for these insights that he gives us as Catholic Christians, the meaning of life, the cause that we live for is Christ, God, but lived out through vocation. We thank him for the insight. We ask him to reveal our vocation to us if we're still looking. We ask him to help live that vocation if we've already discovered it. Amen. Let us now stand and profess our faith. I believe in one God,